have 15 minutes for his opening presentation. And go ahead and start.
Thank you, Sahotra, for that vigorous opening presentation. He and I will come back to many of the points that he raised during the rebuttal period and also during the question and answer period. I want to give you intelligent design in 3 easy steps. Now, I suppose it should be harder. After all, intellectuals respect things that are difficult, but it isn't actually that difficult. And I'll take you through it very quickly. I may not, in fact, get to the 3rd step. I may have to hold that for my rebuttal period, because I want to go into depth with one line of evidence. Sahotra mentioned several, and I'd like to speak to those, but I want to go in depth into one line of evidence that I think is powerfully compelling, or at least suggestive that something very funny is going on in biology, and we can talk about that. First step, realize what you can already do. And I'll explain what I mean by that in a moment. Secondly, look carefully at the evidence. And here, I agree with Sahotra completely that this ought to be not a political controversy, not something dealt with in the courts, but something dealt with in settings like this, in scientific meetings, in the journals, by looking at the evidence. And lastly, ignore philosophical rules. Now, I need to warn you that this 3rd step is actually very dangerous, especially if you aspire to a career in the sciences. So if you're going to ignore rules, if you're a graduate student, an undergrad, you need to be very careful about that. Step 1, realize what you can already do. Here's the front page of the Los Angeles Times, March 31, 2003. This is at the height of the Iraq War. Now, this photograph is occupying the most valuable real estate in a newspaper, above the fold on the left-hand portion of the page. A few days after this picture was published, the photographer was fired by the Los Angeles Times. See if you can figure out why. Look in particular at the left-hand portion of the photograph. Notice, for instance, the curve of this man's back and the curve of this man's back and the shape of their knees, respectively. Or this man's profile and this man's profile. Now, you're an LA Times subscriber. You go out in Brentwood in the morning in your bathrobe, pick up the paper, you see this picture. It triggers your curiosity. Now, you might be an atheist, you might be a Buddhist, you might have no philosophical or theological views at all. This, however, is a real pattern. There it exists in your hands, calling for explanation. There are an unusual number of identical twins in the left-hand portion of that photograph. That is a puzzle calling for explanation. Now, what actually happened was the picture that I showed you wasn't taken, these two were. And the photographer noticed what you doubtless noticed, which is that there are more dramatic parts in each of the pictures respectively, and trying for a Pulitzer Prize, he photoshopped them together. Now, unfortunately, he was in Iraq, near Basra, in a war zone working on deadline, and he did not notice that he reproduced the same people twice in the left-hand portion of the photo, but his editors did. And they had a puzzle that they needed to explain. And here is their toolkit for doing that. Now again, don't worry about philosophy, theology, or any sort of metaphysical question. You just have a puzzle that you wish to account for. And that's the toolkit that you're going to use. Your explanatory armamentarium, if you will. So what explains it? Well, if you go on the web and read the news accounts of the discovery of this photograph and what the editors at the LA Times did, they first ran through the possible natural causes for this pattern, and they quickly exhausted them. They very quickly exhausted them. The reason that that pattern exists is because of design, because of deliberate intent. He lost his job. It's a tragic story, actually, because he violated the policy of the LA Times and all newspapers that I know that they will not publish electronically manipulated images without informing their readers. You already detect intelligent causation. In fact, you do so with such facility that you don't even realize it. But if you pay attention to how you negotiate your day as a reasoning being, you are constantly saying, if you're even conscious of it, that event had an intelligent cause, that event had a natural cause, and I can discriminate between the two. And these inferences are remarkably stable. By that I mean their longevity over the life of science, or just ordinary reason, is remarkable with respect to the other parts of science. What's the reasonable thing to infer about that pattern? Outside Bath in the UK, on a plane there. You're a Roman centurion, 1st century AD, riding out with your troops. You come over a hill and you see that collection of monoliths. You're a pagan. Maybe you have no views at all. You're going to infer design. And that inference is true today, as true as it was 2,000 years ago. It will be true when the universe goes down to its thermodynamic heat death, and our current theories are gone. The inference that Stonehenge was caused by an intelligence is remarkably stable with respect to other parts of science. In fact, this mode of reasoning is widespread in human inquiry. All types of forensic investigation. People don't ordinarily splash gasoline around their living room. If you're an arson investigator, you work for a fire department, you go to the scene of the fire and you find the presence of an accelerant, you have good reason to believe that someone meant for that house to burn down. Cryptography and cryptanalysis, code making and code breaking. The code maker wishes to hide in what otherwise appears to be noise, meaningful information. The code breaker wants to get it out. That whole enterprise is predicated on our being able to detect intelligence. Remote sensing and planetary science. Let's say you work for the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and you've got a satellite that's monitoring pollutants. How do you know that you can bring charges against a major industrial polluter? Well, you know because you detect the presence of a chemical whose signature is anthropogenic. That chemical would not be present, and you detect it by satellite, unless an intelligence, at least one, had produced it. This is self-evident. If you walk out with a trained archaeologist or paleoanthropologist, they can detect the activity of intelligence in what would appear to you and me to be just a scattered field of rubble. But they see a pottery shop there, or they see a worked flint in that same field. Lastly, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. Now here, the metaphysical temperature begins to go up, because if ET is out there, he or she or it is not a member of Homo sapiens. And we will detect them in terms of the signals that they produce, because those signals will be diagnostic for intelligence. But how about this? Drosophila, a tunicate, a panda, my daughter Olivia, and by the way, that shot went wide. They didn't score on that. She's a great goalkeeper. Or Richard Dawkins. These are biological objects. If they had an intelligent cause, it is certainly not a member of our species. Now, we've taken the knob on our metaphysical oven and we've cranked it all the way over to broil. Because what's sort of self-evident and obvious about detecting human intelligence now becomes philosophically very problematic. Because if these objects had an intelligent cause, the temperature has risen considerably.